Hey, what's up, guys? So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Good Friday Agreement, also known as the GFA or the Belfast Agreement, which was a document with legislation that was agreed upon by the various political parties in Northern Ireland, as well as both the Irish Republic's government and the British government. It was signed April 10th, 1998, and was made effective on December 2nd, 1999. So leading up to it, in the 1990s, there were on and off ceasefires, and both sides of the conflict ultimately began to engage in talks. There was a desire to resolve things peacefully, as opposed to the decades of violence, which had gotten both sides basically nowhere. The British realized that they would probably never be able to quash the IRA completely, and the IRA could realize that no matter how much violence they caused, they would not be able to get serious concessions from the British. 3,500 people about had died since 1969 when the Troubles had begun, and many more than that were injured, and Northern Ireland was still under direct rule from Westminster in England. Um, so it was negotiated. Bill Clinton was really passionate about helping the situation in Northern Ireland, so he sent Senator George Mitchell from Maine to mediate the talks. George Mitchell had no previous experience with Ireland, which seems kind of odd, but I suppose this enabled him to claim complete neutrality and impartiality. And then there was Tony Blair, who had recently become Prime Minister of the UK, so he represented their side, and he was very eager to move forward with peace talks. So the agreement was structured into two parts that were interrelated. There was a multi-party agreement by most of Northern Ireland's political parties, and there was an international agreement between the Irish and British governments, which was the British-Irish Agreement. So the agreement begun basically just talking about how the Troubles have been extremely horrible and violent, and we want no more of that. The document opened with the words, "We, the participants in the multi-party negotiations, believe that the agreement we've negotiated offers a truly historic opportunity for a new beginning." The document referred to tragedies of the past that had left a deep and profoundly regrettable legacy of suffering, and that the best way to honor those who died or had been injured and their families was a fresh start. The opening statement went on to say that the participants reaffirmed their total and absolute commitment to exclusively democratic and peaceful means of resolving differences on political issues and their opposition to any use or threat of force. They acknowledged the substantial differences between them, but declared they would work to ensure the success of the agreement. Uh, Under the section titled Constitutional Issues, the agreement stated that the participants acknowledged that it would be wrong to make any change in the status of Northern Ireland without the consent of a majority of its people, and it went on to cover the changes to be made to British law and the Irish Constitution from which a territorial claim over Northern Ireland was removed. So both the Republic of Ireland and the UK removed their territorial claims to Northern Ireland. Um, in the middle section of the agreement, it basically set out a complex series of provisions relating to a number of areas, and it consisted of three strands. So, Strand 1 was about the status and system of government within Northern Ireland and then within the United Kingdom. This dealt with the establishment and operation of a democratically elected power sharing assembly in Northern Ireland. This is known as Stormont. Uh, and it included safeguards for cross-community participation, such as the allocation of committee chairs, ministers, and committee membership in proportion to party strengths. Strand 2 was about the relationship between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, so the North and the South. Um, they created the North-South Ministerial Council, the Interparliamentary Association, and the Consultative Forum. So it was to bring together those with executive responsibilities in Northern Ireland and the Irish government on matters of mutual interest. And the third strand was about the relationship between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom, so East and West, I guess. Uh, a British Irish Council was set up under Strand 3 to promote the harmonious and mutually beneficial development of the totality of relationships among the people of these islands. So that meant a body of like representatives of the British and Irish governments and devolved institutions in Northern Ireland. And then the final section of the agreement uh, So the participants affirmed their commitment to the mutual respect, the civil rights, and the religious liberties of everyone in the community. So big shift. And measures included the establishment of a new Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission and the incorporation of the European Convention on Human Rights into Northern Ireland law. There are statements that then follow on the importance of acknowledging the suffering of victims of violence and economic, social, and cultural issues. There was a section on decommissioning of paramilitary weapons. This proved to be the most contentious. It required the participants to use any influence they may have to achieve the decommissioning of all arms within 2 years following the referendum, North and South of the agreement, and in the context of the implementation of the overall settlement. Said the British government is committed to as early a return as possible to normal security arrangements in Northern Ireland. So basically getting rid of the military and treating Northern Ireland like a police state. They also implemented the Patent Commission to look at the issue, as well as a parallel commission looking into criminal justice in Northern Ireland. Equally controversial as decommissioning and changing the way that it was policed was the provision in the agreement for the early release of paramilitary prisoners. As long as the organizations to which they were linked were maintaining a complete and unequivocal ceasefire. And yeah, that was a lot for some people. The final stages of the agreement dealt with issues such as a new British-Irish agreement, the holding of referendums, and review procedures following implementation. So the GFA, Good Friday Agreement, it had to be approved via referendum in both Northern Ireland and the Republic. Packets containing the entire text of the document were sent to every household so voters could be informed of all the details and make up their own minds on whether they thought it was a good idea. And then the referendum was held on May 22nd, 1998, so about a month and a half later, after it was agreed on by the different parties and governments. In the Republic, more than 94% of voters voted in favor of the agreement, and so that's a lot. And in Northern Ireland, less, but still 71% of voters voted in favor of the agreement. The thinking behind why there was less support for the agreement in Northern Ireland is that there were more Unionists or Loyalists in Northern Ireland, and they felt that they were making more concessions than the Nationalists were, and were losing the protection from the UK. Under the agreement, if a majority of voters in Northern Ireland and in the Republic wanted a united Ireland, then it would happen. Any idea of Northern Ireland switching from being part of the UK to being part of the Republic was completely unacceptable to some, and the Democratic Unionist Party, or the DUP, with good old Ian Paisley, who we heard about earlier, he even withdrew from the talks before the agreement was finalized, although I believe he ended up supporting it later on. Other reasons for why people were against the agreement was because both sides were extremely leery of the other, especially the paramilitaries. Regarding the decommissioning of weapons and giving up the armed struggles, both sides were worried that they would give up their weapons and protection, while the other side wouldn't. And if the deal ever fell through and things went back to how they were before, their side would be completely defenseless. And the other provision of the agreement, which was really upsetting to some, was the fact that convicted paramilitary prisoners would be released, bombers, murderers, terrorists, depending on who you ask. Some people who had loved ones killed or injured felt that, like, by having these prisoners released, the victims were being robbed of, basically justice. And they couldn't imagine, people convicted of horrible crimes suddenly getting out and walking the streets again. However, despite all that, the referendum was passed due to support from the majority of both Irish voters in the North and South. And this essentially ended the 30-year chapter in Northern Irish history known as the Troubles. The armed conflict had pretty much ended, and a new era begun, where problems would be solved politically and peacefully. And that's pretty much it. That went a little bit long, but there's a lot of information, and I tried to keep it as brief as possible. So, all right, thanks for listening, guys.